Hey friends, I hope you're all doing really well and welcome back to another video. Today's video is a follow-up of one of the videos that I shared around February of this year, and it was my favorite love stories book recommendations video. A lot of you guys were really sweet in that video and a lot of you also asked for part 2. So I thought that it was finally time and long overdue for me to film a part 2 of my favorite love stories. So today I have with me 14 more books to share with you guys, and I thought it'd be really fun to categorize them according to different tropes. Just like last time, I've tried to keep them as spice free as possible, so if you guys don't enjoy reading spice like me, then hopefully you'll be able to find some brand new books. So if you're ready, do go grab yourself a cozy drink and let's get into the video. So for our very first trope, we have enemies to lovers. I find it really satisfying to see two people who hated each other at one point end up falling in love. So for the very first book, I've decided to go for If You Could See the Sun by Anne Liang. This is a YA contemporary romance story with a little touch of magical realism in it as well. But you follow Alice, who is currently attending an international school in Beijing. However, she is the only student who is there on scholarship, and so she always feels a little bit invisible, surrounded by China's most influential teenagers. But then things start going a little bit crazy when she realizes that she actually is turning invisible. So when her parents announce that they can no longer afford her tuition even with her scholarship, Alice decides to take advantage of her newfound power of turning invisible to find out the secrets that her classmates really want to know in exchange for their money. Along the way, she ends up needing the help of a boy called Henry, whom she absolutely despises, and so she ends up having to force herself to be around him, and the two of them go on from there. Academic rivals is probably one of my favorite tropes of all time. There was so much tension between Alice and Henry, and I really ended up falling in love with Henry. I thought he was the sweetest boy. The tone of this book is a little bit snippy and snarky. Our main character is very much surrounded by a bunch of privileged, entitled, pretentious people, and I will say that our main character Alice wasn't the nicest character to read about, I don't think. You would think that she would be a little bit more humble given her background, but I found her a little bit annoying. However, I do think that was done intentionally because a lot of Anne Liang's female protagonists are flawed and they don't come across as perfect individuals. So yeah, I really enjoyed If You Could See the Sun, and if you haven't picked it up already, it's definitely worth a shot. Next up in the enemies to lovers trope, we have The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, and this is a YA fantasy. I'm sure a lot of you guys have read this already or know about it, but in case you don't, in the Cruel Prince trilogy we follow Jude. But Jude was 7 years old when her parents were murdered, and so she and her sisters ended up being stolen away to the high courts of Fairy. And so this story takes place 10 years later, when all Jude wants is to be able to fit in with the rest of the Fae. However, many of the Fae despise humans, and Prince Carden, who is the youngest son of the High King, gives her a particularly difficult time. Like I mentioned with If You Could See the Sun, I love a good academic rival story, and because you see Jude and Carden at school together at the Fae school, there is a lot of tension building on from their studies and their lessons. The Fae in this book are presented in a way that's probably according to tradition. They're presented as really beautiful creatures, but they're also incredibly horrendous with some of the things that they get up to. And so Jude and Carden really do start off as enemies, and that's not taken lightly. He really gives her an awful time. So their relationship, it really is a slow burn across all 3 books in the trilogy, and I found it really unputdownable. Talking about this series makes me really want to reread it, and I feel like with the added Fae setting, it's really atmospheric to read about, especially this time of year. And for the third book in this particular trope, we've got A Far Wilder Magic by Alison Saft. This is another YA fantasy or romantasy, and you follow Margaret and Wes. At the start of this story, you follow Margaret, who has recently spotted the Halla in the woods of her house. Now in this kingdom, whenever this mythical creature is spotted, the half-moon hunt follows swiftly. Whoever succeeds first in killing the Halla will gain fame and earn money as well. So Margaret, as a sharpshooter, is determined to enter enter the competition. However, the competition only allows teams of 2, and so she ends up having to partner with Wes, who is an alchemist. So I suppose this isn't really an enemies to lovers, it's more so a forced proximity trope, but the two main characters do really hate each other at the beginning, and you also see a grumpy sunshine kind of personality reflected in Margaret, who is very stoic and she's a bit cold, as opposed to Wes, who is really flirty and he loves having a good time. This was my very first Alison Saft novel, and I was really taken with the way she wrote because I feel like there's a very haunting kind of romantic nature about her prose. I think what sold the romance to me was how believable it was. Wes is really immature and he comes off as very childish, and he has a lot of growing up to do, and he also has some commitment issues, whereas Margaret has the opposite problem where she's very guarded and she doesn't like to give her heart away easily for fear of it being broken. So she's very harsh with Wes, and the two of them have a lot of growing up to do in the time that they're together. Because the hunt takes place in this forest, you get this wonderful misty, rainy, autumnal setting, and we also get a dual POV, which is one of my favourite ways to consume a romance story. So I would really recommend picking this one up if it's looking a little bit grey and dull and wet outside and you want to have a really sweet romance blossom between two unlikely characters. And on the subject of love, it's so important to make sure that you're also taking care of yourself, so I'm really excited to say that this video is partnered with Foreo. Foreo is a Swedish company that focuses on creating innovative beauty solutions for skincare. I've been noticing lots of people use the Luna 4 device for a couple of years now, so I was really excited when Foreo reached out to me asking if I'd be interested in trying it out. The Luna 4 is a 2-in-1 smart facial cleansing and firming device for brighter and healthier looking skin. It offers a choice between gentle, regular or deep cleansing, which I really appreciated because I have really sensitive skin, and so I was really relieved that this didn't irritate me at all. I was actually really shocked when I first felt the bristles because they're so soft and feathery light. Now, just for a little bit of skincare background, I've been using a natural konjac sponge for perhaps almost a decade now because, like I said, I have really sensitive skin and I also have eczema, so I'm very picky about what products I use on my face. But the biggest issue for me with the konjac sponge was that I was not only having to constantly replace it, but I also felt like my skin wasn't getting a deep cleanse because I kept getting build-up. So I love that the Luna 4 is not only bacteria resistant to help reduce any breakouts, but it's also a one-time investment, and so that means I won't have to continue purchasing other cleansing devices. So I've been loving that my skin feels really clean now, and so if you've always been interested in trying out their products, now is the best time to give it a go since we're approaching their Black Friday sale. I actually believe they're in the middle of it right now, so click the link below and you can use my code Ahya35 to get an additional 35% off almost all of their products, even the ones that are already on sale, I've been told, which means that you can get up to 50% off. So thank you so much again to Foreo for letting me try the Luna 4, and let's get back into the video. Moving on to our second trope, we have the love triangle. This trope always manages to stress me out, but it does make me really invested in the characters, so I have 3 books to share with you guys, and the first is A Lady's Guide to Scandal. This is a historical romance written by Sophie Owen, and it's also a loose interpretation of persuasion. But in this story, you follow Eliza, who 10 years ago had to marry the Earl of Somerset, and he wouldn't be her first choice. For one, he was 20 years her senior, and so when her husband passes away, Eliza is widowed, but for the first time in her life, she has the freedom and money to do whatever she pleases. And so instead of mourning quietly, she decides to go off to Bath with her cousin, and here she encounters 2 different men. One is a face from the past and another is a very roguish poet. I love a good Regency romance, and this one is no exception. But I picked this book up because I fell in love with the very first book in the series, although they are all standalone so you can read them separately. But the chemistry in this this love triangle for book number 2 was insane. I really had a tough time choosing between the two different men, and I couldn't decide who I shipped more with Eliza. I find that Sophie Irwin is really able to put you on a bit of an emotional roller coaster, because I ended up crying in this story, and that wasn't something I expected going into it. So if you feel like you're really in the mood for like a historical Regency romance, then this one is one I really recommend. Now moving on, we have a YA German contemporary romance with a touch of mystery, and it's A Castle in the Clouds by Kirsten Gear. This one is so perfect for winter because it's set all the way up in the Swiss mountains, and every New Year season a grand ball takes place at this great hotel where guests are invited from all over the world, and you follow in particular Sophie. Sophie is working as an intern this year, and it's her responsibility to make sure that everything is running smoothly in the lead up to this great New Year's party. But she keeps bumping into problems, and some of the guests also aren't who they claim to be. So not only is this story a bit of a mystery, Sophie also ends up encountering two different boys, hence the love triangle. I adored the wintry, snowy setting of this hotel up in the Swiss Alps. I thought that was so magical. This book is filled with the quirkiest characters, and there's also a very humorous tone to it that I wasn't expecting at first but quickly fell in love with. I ended up loving the insular setting of this grand old hotel surrounded by all the snow and wintry landscape, and I feel like having this mystery set in a very closed off setting made it for a very cozy experience. I also ended up loving our two boys and seeing which one Sophie would go for in the end, so highly recommend this one, and I actually really want to reread it this winter now that I'm talking about it. Now for the very next one, I don't currently own it, but it's by Shannon Messenger and it's called Keeper of the Lost Cities. This is actually a middle grade fantasy series, and I believe that Shannon Messenger is still in the middle of writing it. It's not complete despite being like over 10 books long, but in the midst of this huge series there is a very slow burn romance right at the heart of it. So in this book series, at the very beginning you follow another character called Sophie, and Sophie Foster is 12 years old, but she's also secretly a telepath. However, everything changes one day when she comes across a boy called Fitz, who is apparently also able to read minds, and so Fitz ends up introducing Sophie to this whole new world where everything is completely different from the human lifestyle that Sophie was living, and she quickly learns that in order to protect her family from any harm, she has to leave everything behind and move to this brand new world. If you enjoyed Percy Jackson, then Keeper of the Lost Cities is very similar to it, except instead of Greek mythology you have elves. I did end up getting just about to book 7 before pausing because I think the 7th book was about 900 pages long, and it felt like it was getting just a little bit too info dumpy. That being said, I think the one thing that really kept me going through this series was the slow burn love triangle between Sophie, Fitz and another boy called Keith. If you like slow burn at like a snail's pace, then I feel like you'll really enjoy this, because at the 7th book we still hadn't had the love triangle be resolved. It was only barely getting addressed. Personally, I'm team Keith, so yeah, my heart stands with Keith, but it's definitely a fun series to dip your toes into if you're looking for a whole new magical world. But I feel like with that we really segue nicely into our next category, which is slow burn. Now, as someone who doesn't really enjoy insta love, I feel like slow burn and pining is where all the romance is. I personally don't think insta love is very satisfying or gratifying to read about at all, so I have another 3 books to share with you guys, and the first is A Sky Painted Gold by Laura Wood. This is a YA historical coming of age romance story about a girl called Lou, and it's absolutely perfect if you love The Great Gatsby, or if you were like a fan of the nostalgic element and storytelling of I Capture the Castle by Zadie Smith. But this story is set in a very sleepy Cornish village, and you follow 17-year-old Lou. Now in this village there is a house that belongs to the Cardews, and this house has stood empty for years, so Lou as a writer has always daydreamed about what kind of stories might belong to such a house. One summer, to her great surprise, Lou finds out that the owners of the Kajus are back, and she ends up encountering the brother and sister of the house. And through that summer, she ends up getting swept off her feet as she becomes involved with the moonlight parties and the glamorous lifestyle, although she begins to wonder at the same time whether there is something slightly darker underneath all the glitz and the glam. I would have given this book 10 stars if I could have, and that's how smitten I was with the whole story. It thrummed with so much romance and tenderness, and it's so romantically told. I remember feeling absolutely devastated by the time that I finished this book, and when I was realizing that I was getting closer and closer to the end, because I really didn't want the story to finish. It captures that hedonistic frenzy of the jazz age and also a coming of age romance between Lou and the brother of the house. I love seeing their relationship evolve because they belong to two very different worlds, so you can imagine a lot of tension and a lot of chemistry resulting from it. So yes, this is definitely one of my all-time favorite books and I highly recommend. Next up is another one I don't currently own, but it's Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. In this story, Yumi comes from a world where there is a lot of meditation and there are gardens and it's very warm, which contrasts deeply with Painter's world where it's very dark and there are a lot of nightmares and there's also a lot of technology. But one day the two end up switching bodies and they wake up to find that they are in a completely different world. So it's about the two of them communicating with each other as they're trying to figure out what's really going on. I thought that the world building was really stunning with this particular book because Yumi's world is inspired by medieval Korea, whereas Painter's world is inspired by modern day Japan. So I love the contrast between the two different worlds. I thought that was done beautifully, but I also thought that the romance between Yumi and Painter was really sweet. Yumi and Painter end up really relying on each other because they're the only ones who realize that there is something off in this world because they've swapped bodies. So they're both thrown into the deep end of things and they end up clinging to one another, and it's really sweet seeing their relationship unfold. It's also a very funny book. Now, this is where I had slight issues because I felt like the humor was just a little bit excessive for me, and I also remember reading this one Goodreads review where they were saying that they could tell that Brandon Sanderson was having a really good time writing it, but maybe failed to bring us along on the journey. However, that being said, the majority of people gave this 4 stars. I think it's very highly rated, so I did want to include it in case it doesn't bother you at all. I feel like this is turning out to be a very long video, but the next book we have is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. This is another YA fantasy set at a school with a bit of horror in it, but the Scholomance is a very unique school in that there are no teachers, there are no holidays, and friendships are purely for strategic purposes. Once you're inside, the only way of leaving is if you manage to graduate or unfortunately if you die within the school. But you follow Elle in particular, who has no allies, she has no friends at the Scholomance, but she does have a very deadly power that threatens to kill everybody, including all the students. So she's got to decide if it's worth using her powers or not, and in the middle of all of this she ends up encountering Orion as well. Now Orion is very popular amongst the students, so when he starts giving Elle a bit of attention, it sort of shocks everybody, including Elle. I love the slow burn hints at romance between the two of them over the 3 books. The fact that Orion is considered to be a bit of a golden boy at school, a bit of a hero, whilst Elle is viewed as this monstrous villain, really gives like golden retriever black cat energy. I love that the growing relationship is a bit of a nuisance to Elle throughout the series, and I found it really entertaining to read about. So if you're looking for a fantasy with a little bit of romance in it, then I really recommend A Deadly Education. This next category I've labelled as it's a little bit messy, it's a bit complicated. As we all know, love is complex and difficult, and so these next few books really touch on the messy nature of love. And because I feel like I've shared a lot of YA books so far, I'll be moving on to more adult fiction, but this is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, and it's a adult fantasy. This is a high fantasy inspired by the very turbulent history of ancient Asia, but there also happens to be a very good academic rivals in it. In it, you follow Rin, who shocked the whole country when she, an orphan from the Rooster province, successfully managed to pass all the tests and got into Sinagard, the country's most elite military school. From the get-go, she's targeted for being different, for her skin color, for her poverty, as well as her gender. But very quickly, Rin learns that she has access to these unearthly powers. So you see Rin as she explores the depths of her powers, how far she can go to push herself, being mentored by a rather insane teacher, and this becomes especially important once war breaks out. I feel like with the world building and the high fantasy and all the politicking involved in it, it made it for a really jam-packed book. This is only book 1 of 3, and so much happens in this first book that I feel like you really have to mentally prepare yourself. But I was particularly obsessing over Najjar and Rin's relationship. Najjar is a character who gives her the hardest time. He's incredibly good looking and privileged and has basically very different opportunities to Rin. Every single character in this book is deeply flawed, including Rin, and that obviously makes it for a very messy ride. It's a book of epic proportions and huge stakes involved as well. So if you're looking for a very much high fantasy that will stress you out potentially, then The Poppy War is a great place to start. Next up is the only classic I've got on this list, and it's White Nights by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a Russian short story, and I feel like White Nights really had its moments on Bookstagram at one point. I was seeing so many different people take photos with this or be in the middle of reading it. But set in St. Petersburg in Russia, you follow a young man who is essentially battling with this inner sense of turmoil because of unrequited love. This story is a bit of a blend between realism and romanticism, and I feel like you spend a lot of time in the character's head as he deals with all these turbulent emotions. I loved the exploration of unrequited love and the pain of seeing somebody you love fall in love with someone else. Loneliness is a universal experience, and I feel like the way that Dostoevsky explored it was really beautiful. The way that it's written is very dreamy and effervescent and ephemeral, and I feel like love is a thing that you can't really hold on to, and it's kind of out of your control. So yeah, White Nights really explores that in a really beautiful manner. And then we also have Happy All the Time by Laurie Colwin, which is a modern classic. So I suppose White Nights wasn't the only classic on this list, but this is a literary fiction novel that a lot of people have described as a 1970s Sally Rooney. But essentially you follow 4 different people and the ways their lives intersect with one another. The 4 people are flawed in many ways. They have their different odds and quirks, and in spite of all that, they do manage to find love. So you follow them in all the ups and downs of their love lives. To me, this book felt really sophisticated, and I loved some of the messages that were explored surrounding the topic of love. Again, these characters are not perfect by any means, and I actually found the women in particular a little bit tricky to relate to and to empathize with, but I was really taken with the writing, and I loved seeing the 4 people come together and overcome their different flaws. So if you're in the mood for a litfic classic, then Happy All the Time is a really great one. And now I have just 2 more books to share with you guys, but in this category we have Second Chance Romance. To be fair, this book could definitely fit in with the other chose, but I thought I would include it here because it's quite a strong theme, and it's Falling Like Leaves by Misty Wilson. This is a YA contemporary rom-com perfect for autumn fall, but the reason why I included it here is because our main character ends up bumping into a character called Cooper, who was her childhood best friend. At the start of the story, Alice, our protagonist, lives in Manhattan, and unfortunately, due to the separation of her parents, she ends up having to move with her mum to Bramble Falls. This is a town that is known for celebrating fall and gets up to all the fall festivities, and so when Alice gets roped into all the different fall activities, she ends up constantly bumping into Cooper and has to address the problems that she left behind. You know, this book was cheesy and corny in all the best ways. Our main character, to be honest, is a little bit insufferable to begin with, and I wasn't sure if I was going to like the story because of her. But I ended up becoming so invested and I couldn't put the book down. I had to know what happened next. So if you're looking for a really quick, easy, cute read, then Falling Like Leaves is such a fun one. And last but not least, I have a book that didn't quite fit into any of these categories in particular because it sort of encompassed all of them or a lot of them. So I've got Twin Crowns by Catherine Doyle and Catherine Webber. As you can probably tell by the cover, this is a YA romantasy, but don't let the cover fool you into thinking that it's too juvenile for you. This series is so good, and in it you follow two different sisters and they've been separated at birth. One of the sisters, Ren, has been taken out of the palace from which she was born into, and she has known all her life that she would be training to one day supersede her sister Rose on the throne. This series pans out from both Rose and Ren's point of view, so it really captures so much, especially once they both end up falling in love with different men. Twin Crowns has enemies to lovers, it has slow burn, it has a love triangle, it has everything, you guys. I think because it was a YA fantasy and it also was to do with princesses, I wasn't too sure going into it. I was very hesitant actually, but I'm so glad that I decided to pick it up because I ended up falling in love with this whole world. Catherine Doyle and Catherine Webber, I believe, are actually sister-in-laws, so I thought that was a really fun touch. The only reason why I stopped reading this after book 2 was because, unfortunately, to my great sadness, I ended up coming across a review that spoiled what happened in book 3, and it was a huge spoiler about who one of the characters ends up with, and that really gutted me. So I've been really scared to pick up the third one, but you know, I'm gonna have to get over myself and dive back into this world because it's so good. But that was everything. I hope you guys managed to find at least one book that fancies your interest. I've been sitting here, I kid you not, for hours because I couldn't get my words out for some reason today, but hopefully I wasn't too unclear about any of the books. I love reading and talking about books with gorgeous romances in them. So if you guys have any recommendations, please let me know in the comments below. I'm always on the hunt for more good love stories. So yes, I'm going to wrap it up here, and thank you again so much. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next cozy video. Bye friends.